I would like to welcome you all to this special legal compliance webinar that we are running. This is specifically focused on preparing and holding your AGM during COVID-19 and also around the governance documentation and reporting as well too. Today's session is going to be a fairly hands-on session. So what I mean by that is we are going to give you copies of this webinar, which is being recorded, and also all of the PowerPoint slides as well too. And on your Agenda dashboard, we will actually be giving you a checklist tool to actually utilize that's based on the Commonwealth's recent determination for AGMs and key areas that you should be looking to meet that we'll actually cover during this session as well too. As always, these sessions are being recorded all the way up to the Q&A part of the session, where we will open up the phone lines and stay on the line to answer any questions that people might have. If you do have any questions throughout the session, you can certainly raise your hand or also ask questions directly into the questions panel. We are actually monitoring that actively as well too. At that time, we will actually switch off the recording to ensure people's privacy. But in saying that, we will also be circulating out the answers to any questions that are raised during this session as well too. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So let's have a look at today's agenda. And we are focusing on the AGM and holding your AGM during this pandemic, COVID-19. We have, over the last few months, provided a lot of legal advice to agencies, asking questions on things like, can we extend our AGM date? How do we organize virtual meetings? What is a virtual meeting? Do we have the option of running hybrid meetings? And what we mean by that is on both on-site and a mix of virtual meetings. What do we need to inform people about if we are running virtual meetings? Is there any other COVID safe obligations that we need to look at? There's a raft of general sort of questions that agencies have asked, and we've put this webinar together to provide some guidance around this as well too. Obviously, being a law firm, we can assist you with your direct questions around this as well too. And, look, it is something that a lot of agencies have approached us on in relation to rule book questions, agendas, minutes, what they need to record, digital signatures, some of which we'll cover off here as well too. But certainly, look, you can contact us if there are legal governance issues that you want specifically addressed as well too. And this is obviously my area of interest as well too. So you do have my mobile number, and if you don't, we'll be supplying that today as well. So essentially on Tuesday, the 5th of May, the Commonwealth Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, announced temporary amendments to the Corporations Act. The Corporations Coronavirus Economic Response Determination number 1, 2020, as it was called, allows companies to hold AGMs and other meetings entirely online. Now, this is actually irrespective of whether you are permitted to do this in your rule book or constitution rules allow for this as well too. So this is something that actually is now put into legislation and allows for virtual meetings to occur, or your AGMs to occur entirely online. And we'll go through what that can look like. Essentially, the changes were done to be in effect for 6 months at the time, and this took us through till November 2020, 6th of November 2020. But now this has been extended to 21st of March 2021 to allow agencies to facilitate these AGMs. So during this webinar, we will cover off what does this mean for your AGM? What do you need to tell members? How should you run an AGM like this? Because this is actually quite new to people as well too. And what is some of the governance reporting structure of how this can actually work as well too. Now, the Associations or Incorporations Act as part of this and your rule book is generally how AGMs have been run, I'm going to say, before this year. So if we look at sort of what are the overarching pieces of legislation that you need to be aware of, well, before 2020, really what you'd be looking at is the corporations or your relevant Associations and Corporations Act, and obviously your rule book or constitution. And that would be what actually guides your running of your AGM and quorums and numbers and proxy voting and all this sort of stuff is where that's actually covered. What we actually now need to consider is also work health and safety legislation. What we mean by that, if you are looking at hybrid sites, so running a meeting on site, then obviously making sure it's safe for people to attend. Keeping the 1.5 meter rule in place and 4 square meters and all this works in place as well too, to make sure that that is there. And also attendance registers as well too, PPE equipment, if you are running those as well. So there is now, what I'll say, probably more so than obviously previous years, other legislation that actually comes into effect when you're considering running your AGM. This also includes the public health and well-being laws, particularly in, let's say, Victoria, where lockdown measures are only now being gradually eased. But recently, as of even last week, significant measures around lockdown processes, I'm going to say, stifled and hampered how AGMs could actually be really run. And there's also that 5K radius that needed to be considered, and all of these types of requirements are now in place. Obviously, on top of all of this as well too, if you are selecting obviously an AGM date in the future, then you'll need to just monitor what your chief medical officer's directions are closer that date as well too. So if there is an outbreak of COVID-19 in your state or your local area, then what's the process if there is a determination by the chief medical officer to restrict or enforce new measures or new rules? So you can see that all of these essentially needs to be thought of in terms of running your AGM, and processes in place and policies in place to manage this process. And so what we've actually worked with agencies over the past few months now is, well, how can we actually simplify this process and look at this in terms of what you need? And that's what we're going to be looking at today for you as well too. So let's have a look at the media release that came out of the Treasurer's Office. And this was the amended version that came out on 31st of July 2020. And I've got a copy of this item here. And what this essentially looked at was continuing to make it easier for businesses to operate during COVID-19. And the focus of this was on AGMs. The changes essentially, and I'm going to summarize what the legislative compliance changes that were made. The changes allow companies to convene annual general meetings and other meetings prescribed under the Corporations Act entirely online rather than face-to-face. The changes also give businesses, exactly like your agencies as well too, certainty that when company officers sign a document electronically, the document has been validly executed as well. And that includes things like ratifying agendas and minutes, but also other important company documents as well too, where once it's agreed to and votes passed and the likes, then electronic signatures can be applied to documents as well. Under the extension of these temporary measures that were made, companies will continue to provide notice of AGMs to members using emails, achieve a quorum with members attending online, and hold AGM meetings online as well too. And we have had questions around, well, what is our quorum? Where do we find that information? Does it differ from company to company? And the answer is yes, obviously. So when we look at these, this is where you'll need to go back to your individual rule books or constitutions and look at what your quorums actually are. And if people are meeting online, ensuring that those quorums are actually met. We will cover off proxy voting in this session as well too, and look at how that can work as well too. So if people or members don't have access to internet, how do you actually manage that process as well? So essentially what the Federal Treasurer also went on to saying was that meetings must continue to provide members with a reasonable opportunity to participate. Members will continue to be able to put questions to board members and vote online. To execute documents, company officers will continue to be able to sign documents electronically. So for the duration of the extended relief, signatories will not be required to sign the same physical document that may be required. And this will ensure that documents can continue to be properly executed or signed off at a time when ordinary business operations have been disrupted. Now, this is coming as a directive straight from the Commonwealth Treasurer's Office around the Corporations Act legislation and determination. And as I've mentioned, this has been extended to March next year. What we have suggested for agencies, though, and I'll make these recommendations as we're going through and then recap these at the end, is that it's probably important to have a policy that actually covers these particular points and guides your agency's decision making on that you've adopted the determination, that what is the process for each of these 4 items, and what's the process that your agency agrees to. And I make it a policy. We've been asked, why don't we actually put these into the rule book or constitution rule book? And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that these are temporary measures that are in place. There is some discussion about making this temporary legislation permanent, but really at this stage, for ease, rather than even trying to change rules and adopt rules and then having another meeting or the likes to ratify your rule book or constitution, having a board level policy document that covers these points would actually clarify that process and ensure that it's consistent across your agency as well too. Now, there are a number of AGM challenges caused by COVID-19. These include social distancing rules and also numbers of people coming together. So the current social distancing restrictions imposed by Australian governments in relation to COVID-19 may actually restrict the ability to hold an AGM while also complying with COVID-19 restrictions. And this is covered across incorporated associations legislation and also companies limited by guarantee, which a lot of the charities are. So as part of this, what we suggest that you do is look at and consider, if you are delaying your AGM, that it does not stop possible action being taken by other people in relation to your agency. And one of the options is holding either the hybrid AGM or a complete virtual AGM for your agency as well. Agencies should consider whether their rules provide the flexibility around it as well too. And I will come to how you can actually do this as well too. So even if your rules don't allow for the flexibility, what I am going to say to you is acknowledge in your agenda and your notice to members that you're relying on the Federal Treasurer's determination. And I'll actually show you what a structure of this is. Virtual AGMs will necessitate the need for voting at AGMs to occur by poll and a show of hands. And there is the ability for you to manage this. So these are some of the challenges that are caused. Now, the changes to the Corporations Act, which allows you to make these changes, came out of this particular piece of legislation. What we have done around this is summarize this down for you into a checklist tool. So first of all, I am going to cover off key parts of this legislation for you. And there's only a short number of areas for you to be aware of. And then I'm actually going to show you the checklist tool that we've got to help you go through this process and shortcut this for you as well too. So essentially, the initial changes were made to allow people to hold virtual AGMs. This was done, as I've mentioned, until the 6th of November, but now this has been extended to the 21st of March 2021 as well. So essentially, and just to cover this off, under the determination, company boards will be able to provide notice of annual general meetings to members using email, but only for those members who have provided an email address. The balance will still need to get a letter or postcard by mail telling them how to find the notice online. And that's actually important that yourselves be aware of that. Now, as part of this, what I'm also going to recommend that you do is to contact your members, make sure your membership list is actually up to date, whether it is your memberships, contact details as well too. And if they do have email addresses, then start to update this process as well. Also if you are holding hybrid or virtual annual general meeting using one or more technologies without attendees being physically present, then explore that process. There isn't a need to actually look at just one technology around this, so you don't have to stick to one specific technology to your AGM. It's not mandated that way. It simply says you must use it you can use it online. So that can include a number of different platforms. It can also use by telephone as well too, should you wish to go down that path as well too. Also consider the fact of risk of technology failure and meeting invalidity is not addressed as well too. So you may be able to have temporary provisions to process, to adjourn or postpone, may be relatively inexpensive, but it's also important to consider, well, what happens if on the day, if there is a failure, let's say internet connection, and you don't get your quorum or quorum drops as well too, because the members aren't in attendance there as well too. So again, just going through, and what we're suggesting is actually having a policy in place to do that. And we've got a checklist to support you, which you all have access to in your Gemba dashboard too. So when we look at the determination around this, and I'm going to simplify this down for you as well too. Essentially, this is a copy of the legislation that was issued earlier this year. It essentially covers a number of key areas that your AGM must meet when you are running them in a virtual or online environment, as we like to say. So essentially what the first determination allows you to do is it says that a meeting may be held using one or more technologies that give all persons entitled to attend a reasonable opportunity to participate without being physically present in the same place. And this applies to paragraphs B and to E of this section. So essentially, you're able to get a number of different technologies. You do not have to rely just on one. And there are many out there as well too, and we can provide guidance to you if that comes up in the questions area as well too. In terms of participating in meetings, that's covered in Part B. Participating in meetings are taken for all purposes for a quorum requirement to be present at the meeting while participating as well too. And a vote can be taken by poll as well too, not on a show of hands like may have been done in previous years, but again by using one or more technologies to give each person entitled to vote the opportunity to vote in real time where it is possible, and by recording their vote in advance of the meeting as well too. So it does also in part D and E also allow for proxy voting in advance as well if they can't attend the meeting either. So with it, there are a number of sections across each of these that your agency needs to carefully consider as part of this process. It also means that the notice of the meeting, if you have already sent a notice of meeting out, then you can, at least 7 days before the meeting is held, give a fresh notice of the meeting that includes the information referred to in A. So if you need to update your meeting or change it via to an online, then you can effectively, under this direction, this legal update, effectively give re-notice 7 days and change of it to give a fresh notice to your members. And it's important to be aware of this as well too. It also means that having that process, now this is actually irrespective of what your rules or constitutions actually say. So there you can see that this actually overrides some parts of your rules, and why it's so important to be across what this actually says, because it will impact on the AGM that you run this year. With it, what we have done, and I know that some of the language in here can be complicated to actually read through it. So what we have done for you is you'll find on your Gemba dashboard, and I'll just bring this up for yourselves to actually have a look at. If you log in to your Gemba dashboard, and you all have access to this as well too, and I'll just make the screen slightly bigger. You'll see on the left-hand side here, I'll just move these toolbars up and down. The COVID-safe AGM checklist is what we have called it. If you click on that button, what comes up is this form here, and you'll be able to add a new entry. Now, if I go in, and this is one that I've done, what this gives us is the corporation's coronavirus determination, and it gives me the items of what each of these sections in this particular legislation, and it gives you your AGM checklist. We have also added in specific items to prompt you and support you as well too, and you can actually go through and complete this as well too. This is just a shorter version for demonstration purposes. What it will also do for you that are very familiar with this Gemba platform is that because I'm logged in as Fred Flintstone, Fred's name comes up here. It also means that once I complete this, I can add in the date and the time that it was also done. It means then that if, and I'll just put in, let's say, what time is it? It is 11:27. I'll just make it 11:30, and I'll put it in here around this. Now, once I save this, what and why this is actually important for you to actually use is that when you want to record your governance works around the decision-making process for your AGM. For you, every time that a person does this, and it's especially important, for example, for either CEOs that might be organizing their AGM, board chairs, directors, or especially people like the CEO's EA or PA that often has the obligation to organize the AGMs, then in that case, anytime that you update this, there are, if I click on this, audit logs that are left behind. So if members question you, and I'm going to come to this in the next short part of these slides, if your members question you on the timing of your decisions for this, you can actually show them we've actually made these decisions and why we actually made these decisions as well too. It also means, as I've mentioned in the past, that you might have policy documents that you want to load into this to say, hey, look, we've got this, and what the decision was that we've made. So in that case, you'll see that we've got evidence folders. And again, this is all here for you to use. When I click on the evidence folder here, what it'll show up is the ability for me to add evidence into this. So if I wanted to add a policy of a version that I've got, and I'll just bring up something that we've got in here as well too, and I can actually then select a policy document that I want. And quite simply, I can select that here. And you can see that I've just loaded in a policy document, and I can now click on upload file. What this gives me is the date, the time, and who uploaded it as well too. So when it comes, and you'll see on this form, it'll ask you for copies of your agendas, copies of your AGM documentation, copies of your attendance registers, copies of whether you've decided to hold a virtual meeting or hybrid meeting. So it essentially prompts you through the questions that you should be asking and each of our recommendations that we have made within this legal compliance update. And it essentially also covers off your legal compliance obligations. And it's there for yourselves to effectively use right now around it. So one of the things we just wanted to cover off is when we've been talking of what is a hybrid and virtual AGM, and this is actually quite new to some people. So we're going to cover off some of the operational things that you should be considering. What a virtual AGM is an online platform to attend, vote, and ask questions. And that includes things like Zoom and Skype and Slack and the likes around that. Hybrid AGMs allow members to attend a physical venue or through an online platform. Hybrid AGMs were permitted under the Corporation Act if it is included in the notice of meeting as well too. Now, some of the questions that people ask us is, what happens if we've already sent out the AGM notice? If you have already sent out your notice and you want to change the structure of it to a virtual meeting, then you can, but you need to include the electronic message if the member has provided those details and the notice of yours entities on your websites as well too. When preparing for your AGM, think about whether you want to move it to a hybrid or virtual meeting. Either gives you flexibility, whether to send electronic copies of the notice of meeting in line with the new law as well too. And note that you need your members' email address. And if you don't have it, get it from them as well too. And whether to bring the date of your AGM forward or to push it back in order to rely on the new law determination as well too. Remember, if you are holding a hybrid AGM where you are doing it on site, then obviously there are COVID safe work, attendance and register requirements, and our checklist form will give you that to answer those questions as well too. Now, the AGM notices and documents. Now, we've put in here what is not covered in the legal determination that you need to consider from your operation legal compliance items. Now, what we have done for agencies is help them work through what their AGM notice should look like. Essentially, the AGM, and let's say this is the AGM notice, it should include whether it's virtual or a hybrid. And what we've suggested agencies do is to say it's held in compliance with the Corporations Economic Response Determination 2020, Corporations Act, Public Health and Wellbeing Act, and Chief Medical Officer's Direction and your rule book. It's wordy, but the reason being this is an unusual AGM period that we're running. If you are going to utilize and rely on the new piece of legislation, then put that, what we have been advising agencies and what we've done for agencies just like yours is to put that into the header of the AGM notice. In addition to that, we've also suggested COVID safe statement and access to AGM. If they have any troubles in accessing it during the day, what do they do? So those are the questions that you need to look at. In terms of the governance reporting and AIS statement, if you've sent that already through to the ACNC and the likes, auditor statements and availability of documents, how do you and where can they actually get those directly on the AGM notice? And so this structure for your AGM notice is very, very clear, and it meets the requirements of what you need to consider as well too. In terms of other items, if you are looking at the channels of getting this information out to your members, then when you look at meeting the legal compliance obligations, then the other documents that you should consider is things like your annual report, a message from the chairperson or CEO about why, when, and how you will hold your AGM. We've suggested that you actually do this if you don't do it in the AGM notice, because it can be quite a big document then, and sometimes agencies want to keep it quite simple. Then put it as a covering letter as well too, about a statement that goes out. You can include a contact phone number for questions and specify timelines that when this will be open and when it will be closed as well too. If you are organizing voting by and proxies, then clear instructions on how and where and when these need to be returned to and by whom as well too. So the channels that we're talking about here, and we're aware that not all members will have access to email. So they may go onto your website. They may access it by email. They may get it by post, or you may call them to go through it with them as well too. So there is a lot of organization that can be done, but it's also something that we can work with your agency on to look at the special demographics for yourselves to consider as well. The other question that we do get asked is, what about people who don't have internet access? What can we do for them? Well, if your membership is not online or really isn't technology literate around it, you may offer the alternative of proxy voting by mail. Make sure you allow them a decent amount of time, and for those reasons, that's why you may actually push out your AGM as well too, to allow them to receive papers and respond to them as well too. So there is a few options around that you may also consider as well too. The other part that we're going to make recommendations on is essentially we've made a series of recommendations around this, and these include reviewing the need to hold non-essential meetings, where the association rules, have a look back through that as well too, and if not, but you want to rely on a virtual AGM or hybrid, then quote the relevant legislation. Where a meeting cannot be postponed, then again, you have ensure that the meeting venue is large enough for members to attend safely in accordance with social distancing guidelines, and looking at things like attendance registers, work health and safety, PPE equipment, for, obviously people registering, and also ensuring sanitizers, and if you are in Victoria, the use of face masks as well too, so meeting requirements under relevant state laws, but also ensure that members are kept informed of any measures being implemented that may impact on them, including any proposed actions or delays or changes to timeframes and formats of meetings. A lot of the time, issues can arise and can be avoided simply by keeping your members up to date around this. The other part that we recommend is carefully consider when your AGM will be scheduled. The Treasurer's temporary changes to the law were scheduled to finish on the 6th of November. They've now been extended right through till March next year, and consider obviously running your AGM well before this date. Carefully consider how your AGM will be run as well too, and if you are either relying on compliance with your current constitution or rule book, but also utilizing the new law if you found it an advantage to do so. The important part is look at interacting in real time. Actually does sound, and I'm going to say does sound quite cool to do, but can it really work? You need to consider by who may be using this technology, and also we've said also consider, unfortunately, who may be using this technology for bad. We've had situations already around board stacking, member stacking issues that have come up where people have wanted to get things through. It is something that your agency needs to just keep in mind as well. We have provided legal advice on all of these issues in the past. It is something that you do need to unfortunately consider, but it is something you need to be careful about. With that, as I've mentioned, you do have access to the COVID safe checklist on your dashboard as well too. We will open up the phone lines and more than happy to stay online and answer any questions that people might have. If you are watching this webinar after this session today, you can contact us on 1300 360 360 or email us at support@gemba360.com.